Okay, hello everyone. Yeah, I waited 2 more minutes. Sometimes there are people who are a bit late, but I think we should start. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Night of the Pack. My name is Peter Potrefsky. I'm the director of the Australian Pack of 7 branch here in Brisbane, Queensland, in Australia. Today, James Garrett is talking about continuous integration and with Jenkins. He's going to introduce himself in a minute. So some words about questions during the presentation. You can ask questions whenever you like, so we answer them immediately. We haven't planned for FAQ, but if you have questions after the presentation, you can ask them, of course, and we will discuss them. If you have questions after the event, you can contact us and we will be happy to answer your questions. Yeah, I think that's it. The event is being recorded already. So just wanted to let you know that you're recorded now. If you ask questions, we'll be on there.
So before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that Jenkins is something I'm actually super passionate about. So you might find me speaking a little fast sometimes. It's also a little bit of nerves, but mostly just because it's something I really enjoy. In any case, if you need me to repeat something or want me to slow down or ask a question, feel free to just stick a hand up, or I guess in this case, it'd be unmute yourself or say something in the chat. But without any ado, we'll get started. So I'll just share my screen. Okay, so just a table of contents first, a bit of a recap before we get started. So we'll be going through just quickly what is continuous integration, what Jenkins is, how you can install it, the advantages of it, and continuous integration, and a quick demo. I'll also be talking a little bit about how we're applying Jenkins in some current projects. So yeah, as Peter has already said, my name is James Garrett. I'm a web developer and I guess you'd say full stack developer and test lead at Pack of 7. I've been working here for about a year and a half now. I graduated from University of Queensland with a dual bachelor in business and IT. And I am a bit of an exercise nut in my spare time, really enjoy biking and rowing, and I also do some game development and other stuff in my spare time. So what is continuous integration? So continuous integration is basically an autonomous software tool that runs a server in the background that will test code that you have committed to GitHub or whatever kind of source control application you have. It is basically a code quality checker. It will run in the background on a server and will run automated tests, basically tests that you have written. And these tests can occur periodically or whenever you want to trigger it to occur. But basically, they have the server will run these checks on a cycle. So just in a brief diagram, here is an example of how you would use continuous integration. So you have your little developer in green on the left, and you have him commit a new build with errors to GitHub. And then someone else pulls that same build from GitHub and deploys the build to the production server, and that gets sent to the users. So just to clarify, there's an example of a bad situation where a user has, a coder has committed bad code, it's been pulled, put onto production service, and been sent to the users. And you can probably see where this is going. So what happens is that the users will be the ones to actually see the errors, and everyone else will have to figure out afterwards when the users tell the coders and the client that there is something wrong with the code. So obviously this is a situation we want to avoid. So this is where continuous integration comes in. Basically what happens is that you commit the code to GitHub, and then your continuous integration server will be notified by GitHub that it is ready to do another run because some code has been committed to GitHub. It will, your continuous integration server will run the build. It'll attempt to build it, and if you've written any tests, say like XUnit or Jasmine, and you've told the server to run those tests, it'll attempt to run them again. And in this case, as we can see, both the green user and the orange user, so just two different users, have been alerted that there is a build error. So this is obviously quite useful on its own, but it becomes more useful and the benefits of it become more apparent the more people you actually start to add to a project. So you can see in this case, it's no longer one person committing code to GitHub, it's 4 people. Now, in the example we showed before, it's pretty obvious who has caused the error to happen. We can tell because there's 2 people in this pipeline who are making changes to the code. So we can say, okay, the green developer is the one that has caused the error. So we can just go back and fix it because we can look at the code they've committed. But in this case, it's 4 people and you could all be working on the code at the same time. So the issue now is, well, who actually wrote the code that broke the build? And this can get even worse and more exacerbated, especially in 2020 when a lot more people are working from home, when you have separate teams working in separate offices, all committing the code to GitHub or whatever source controller you're using. So imagine in any of these hypothetical situations that you have a robot or some kind of program that tells you when this commit happens, hey, you have committed a faulty build. So in this case, it's Jenkins. We'll see that a little bit more later, but Jenkins is basically operating in a Slack chat and it's posted this build status. So this is pretty useful because not only does it say who committed the commit that broke the build, it'll also say what branch it's on, the commit message, and specifically which tests have passed and which have failed. So this is just an example. We'll see later that you can actually get these continuous integration servers to operate with a number of chat applications like Teams and a few other things, but we'll get into that a bit later. So if we use continuous integration in the same situation as before, where the users saw the error, what would happen instead is that Jenkins or any continuous integration server would be the one to check the GitHub build after it's been committed. But we can see here that instead of the orange user, the server is there instead. Because what you can do with continuous integration servers is not only have code be checked before it gets sent to production, but you can also have it send the code to production. Really, the only limitations of a continuous integration server is how your pipeline is set up. So if you need to email that build to yourself, you might have a bit more difficulties, but if it's just moving to another file address or just another server, you can actually get Jenkins to deploy your build to production server if it detects there's no errors, which is really handy if you don't have the manpower to do that yourself. So we'll get into Jenkins. So Jenkins, as we've seen before, is a version of a continuous integration server that is free, it's open source, and it is built specifically for this, for continuous integration. So as you can see in the image on the left, it operates in a server. In this case, it's a local host server, but you can also have it operate on a remote server. You just open it up in the browser and it can run in Chrome, in Explorer, Safari. Because it's open source, its compatibility with browsers is really only limited by the efforts of the public who add support. And it also just runs on just about any OS you can think of, which makes it really handy. So yeah, as seen before, you add continuous integration into your development pipeline, and it basically becomes the step which tells you when builds have failed. So this diagram is handy because as before, you saw it as like a single run through. Actually, we'll go to this one. Yeah, you can see the continuous integration working for a single commit, but really with Jenkins and a lot of other continuous integration servers, it's a cycle. So what will happen is you'll make a commit, it'll go to GitHub. Jenkins, in this case, acting as the server, will build your code and run the tests, and then it will tell you if any of the tests failed, and it's a cycle. So this could just happen repeatedly while you're coding. You make a commit, you see if things are working fine, and then you make another commit. So it's a good way just to keep yourself in check, even if you're not coding to run into production today. if you're not deploying today, it's just useful just to catch yourself on errors you may have made previously. So it's really good for that kind of thing of just keeping yourself in check with tests running in the background continuously. So Jenkins is pretty easy to install. Like you have to install Java and Node.js, Git, Netcore, a code editor, and a browser. So really, it has all the requirements you'd need for like a typical Node.js or a typical like web development software kind of setup you'd have. So the prerequisites are really quite simple. And obviously Jenkins, you can just download it because it's free. Some more advantages of using Jenkins. As you can see here in the image, there's a number of builds running in the background. So all of these are projects in this image that are being pulled to a Jenkins server and then being tested, and then an output is occurring where you can see some of these are gold, some of these are blue, some of these are red. So basically these are statuses of whether the build is building or not and passing all the tests. And that's quite useful for project managers as a dashboard, because maybe you are working on, let's say, well, this many projects at the same time, or you're looking over this many projects at the same time, so like 10 or 11. Having a very simple visual representation of that, just like even in colors, is a lot easier than having to keep it all in your head at the same time. So not only is it good for developers to see if something is building in a very quick summary, but it's also good for project managers who might not have the time to ask everyone in the office, hey, is this working? Is this building? So it's quite handy for that. Furthermore, because it's open source and free, it's incredibly accessible. So it basically supports every existing, well, I wouldn't say every existing software tool across all development stages, but a large majority of them. If you can think of it, then Jenkins probably supports it. I actually saw today that Jenkins supports Unity. So if you can write tests in Unity, which I've seen that you can, there's a plugin for that that'll work, which is really handy. It supports, in an instance you'll see later, it can do front-end tests for web UIs, but also back-end tests for things like C# and things like that. So it's quite adaptable. And yeah, it's got many, many plugins. So we'll see these two later, but we've got Blue Ocean, which is basically a visual way to represent Jenkins running, doing a single run through in the background. Which we'll see later. And we've also got this thing called Build Monitor, which is another plugin you can get, which is an even simpler kind of dashboard, which is good if you have many applications running or projects running at the same time. But yeah, that's a huge benefit of Jenkins, is just how many plugins there are. Just a few more advantages. So as I said before, you can have tests that occur after every commit, so it'll be running continuously. And it works in multi-branch projects too. So you can have multiple branches all getting reports at the same time. One of the things about Jenkins in particular is that you do have to have tests written for Jenkins to run, but I think that's honestly a good thing because it encourages people to write tests more. This is probably the first company I've worked at where we've had the time and the opportunity to actually write as many tests as we do. And I found it significantly reduces the risk of bugs getting out into production. And it's also just good to have tests in particular because it makes you more confident in your code. As we all know about tests already, you never have time for them, but this kind of forces you to write more tests just so that your code is being checked properly. Moreover, because Jenkins is kind of like a communication tool where it messages chat clients and it also has like a dashboard, it's a really good way to keep communication up between team members because you don't have to keep asking each other, hey, did you merge? Is it building? Because Jenkins can build after every commit or sync or merge. And it encourages everyone to keep in touch with each other too about like who committed what. And as I've said 1,000 times, it's open source and free, which is really nice. So in summary, Jenkins is basically like spell check for your code. That's quite a marketable term that I just thought of the other day, but I think it's a good way to summarize how Jenkins works. It is basically the red squiggly line that occurs when you make a spelling mistake in Microsoft Word, but for your code. So we'll now go through a quick demo, basically building this in a regular 9 project, just a basic hello world. We'll write a test, we'll commit it to GitHub, we'll attach it to a Jenkins server, and we'll run it. This should only take about 10 minutes to do, so I will load up the project that I'm going to be working on. So I'll just get that. Okay. So I'm just waiting for the stream to show that everyone can see what I'm working on. Okay, cool. So I've just got a basic hello world project here. So it literally just spits out hello world in a browser. It's mostly empty, so it's kept quite simple. There are a few things that are already set up. I'll go through them in a minute. I've set up the node modules just so we don't have to sit here for the installation time on Australian internet. So yeah, we'll get the application to run. So we've got the main interface here, the main view that you see. So we'll just type in hello world, make sure that's spelled correctly. And then we'll go ng serve and we'll wait out for run. And while that's happening, I will get the localhost port ready for the local hosting. Yeah, at this point, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. But in any case, we'll just wait for this to build and then I'll bring up the application. So yeah, we still need to build this project for the first time, but yeah, once that's loaded up, we'll continue. So if anyone's got any questions or anything like that, now's a good time to ask. But I guess what else I can talk about is we've been working for Jenkins for about a month and a half now. So this is something that's quite new, but I've encountered Jenkins and seen it since university for about 4 or 5 years, and it's something I've always wanted to implement because it seems like quite a good way to keep your projects under control. So it's something I'm really excited about, and probably the first like real kind of autonomous software I've worked with, and I'm surprised with how easy it is to set this up. You really don't have to go to much effort to set up a Jenkins server. It's really just a matter of how good your tests are. So yeah, I'm quite a fan of it. I guess while this is running, I'll also show some tests that I wish to run for this. So you've got the hello world here, which is quite simple. We've also got some tests. So these are just running in Karma and Jasmine. So we've got should create the app. So that should be quite simple to pass. The title should be hello world. So that's going to fail. And we have another test here. It should render the title in a span and say hello world app is running. But we will come back to that in a second because our application is running. So this is on 4200. So I'll just go to that port. Hello world. Cool. So now that we've got that up and running, I'm quite happy with that. But we'll see if the tests are happy with that. So we'll go ng test. This is the basic testing suite I use. It's, hang on, I need to be in the correct directory. There you go. But yeah, this is the basic testing suite I use whenever I'm running tests nowadays. I find it's quite helpful because if any of you have ever used Jenkins, Jasmine or Mocha or any of those kinds of things before, when they test if your functions are truthy, it'll actually catch errors before you've even written any of tests of your own. So it's quite good just to test ng test before you've committed any project, because it'll often catch like exceptions or like things you wouldn't have thought of. But we'll just wait for ng test to run. While that's running, I am going to make a change to app.component. So we've got hello world. That should be a single word. And I can tell that's already going to fail. Oh, one failed. Cool. So this can also run in the browser, but just for the moment, I just have the tests outputting onto the terminal. So can I read test property text content of null? And we'll get to the other one in a second. So I expect that's because this is looking for text in a span. And so I'll just go span, hello world. Cool. So now I actually know what to look in, but it's not over because it should say hello world app is running. And because I am being sneaky today, I'm just going to copy that text exactly. Hello world app is running. So that test should pass now. Now, you can also set up ng tests to run continuously. So in my Karma setup, which is the test suite I'm running, I have it set to running on Chrome headless. So you can have your tests outputted much more neater in a Chrome browser. And I can set single run to false. So what will happen then is as I make changes, it will spit them out and it'll rerun the tests. So those are some quite handy tools I find for running tests. But this should pass all of its tests for now. So we'll just give this a second to finish. Connected on socket, so it is running on a Chrome browser. Okay, cool. 3 successes. So this project is now passing all of the tests. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new branch where this works and commit it to my GitHub directory that I've made. So we'll just make a branch. Hang on, just get the correct create branch. Call this showcase. And then we'll commit this, we'll say tests running. So, yep. Okay, now you probably saw that, but there was another file called Karma results. This will be handy for later. This is basically a summary of the test results that have run. This is going to be really good for Jenkins. So speaking of Jenkins, we'll now get that started. So I've committed my project to GitHub. I'm now going into Jenkins. So this is my Jenkins setup. I have it set up just on my own computer. You can set this up on your own server if you want, but just for the sake of this demonstration, it's simple just to run off your own computer. So I'm going to be running a plugin called Blue Ocean. I quite like Blue Ocean because it simplifies the process of setting up a pipeline for this. So I'll just be going into that. And I will be creating a new pipeline from GitHub. From my GitHub, and let's see here, I have a few different things. I want hello world. Oh. Cool, so it'll create the pipeline. Now an important step of this that I have neglected to mention to this point is when you create a Jenkins project, you will need a thing called a Jenkins file. So what a Jenkins file is think of it like it's basically like a JSON file that executes steps in order that are your pipeline. So in this one, I have steps for building, testing, archiving tests, and then cleaning up the workspace. So each step, I'm running shell commands on this one. I am clearing the directory where I'm running the tests, npm installing, and then making sure my Karma test reporter is running, and then I'm running the tests. So this one's quite simple and should work. And we will see it visualized in Jenkins. Okay, so you can see a few practices here. We'll stop those because we want the showcase. So basically in Jenkins, you have a number of things called agents, and agents are basically little nodes that have their own memory that will run tests and any tasks you give them. So you can have a few agents running at the same time. Jenkins typically runs off an agent called master, which also just manages the app. You'll see later on that we actually have Jenkins running off of a separate little agent that we have. But yeah. So it's running the test now. So this would probably be a good stage to have a 5-minute break while Jenkins runs. It has to pull data from GitHub. So yeah, cool. So I'll just let this run in the background. If anyone has any questions, this would be a good time to ask. I'm just gonna have this on my other screen so I know when it's done. Cool. Actually, I'm curious. I also just have Jenkins running in the background. And you can see it running my npm install. So yeah, this is the build step. If anyone is curious, you can actually set up Jenkins to also use the same node modules between separate projects, because typically npm install is like the longest step in running a Jenkins pipeline. And you can also set it up just to use the same node modules between projects, so you don't have to worry about the step. And that's something I'm quite excited to figure out at some point, because it would save a lot of time. But at the worst, Jenkins builds usually take between a minute or 7 minutes. And that's not really too much of a problem because it's running in the background. So typically builds will update when you run commits. So you don't have to sit here and wait for the build to complete. You'll just be told if something breaks. So really it's not too important how long it takes, as long as it doesn't take like more than an hour or something. But really in this case, I've never had a build that took more than 7 minutes to finish. And that's because we're running on Australian internet. So the npm install stage where it downloads all the node modules is the slowest. Really actually running the test is lightning fast. But yeah. Usually I prefer to use Blue Ocean, just because you can basically visually step by step go through in like a little wizard, a wizard form, and just run each step, well, create each step, which is a bit easier than having to write it yourself. But writing it yourself is not that hard either. It's just more likely to be syntax correct if you use Blue Ocean. And it allows you to do more complicated stuff, like say, for instance, if you need to test your build on 5 separate browsers, you can have it run those 5 tests at the same time on 5 little different agents. And that's a little bit harder to code out, but if you could do it in Blue Ocean quite easily. Okay, this is done. Cool. And it is all green because our GitHub test is fine. So we now have a complete Jenkins build, and no tests have been archived for this run, but that's fine because we can see here that everything seems to be working fine. In a complete Jenkins build, you can actually also go into tests, and you'll be given a test summary, which I quite like, of all the different tests that have just recently been run, and that's pretty useful. So what we'll do now is go back to the PowerPoint. So event management system. This is one example of a project that we're working on at the moment that's using Jenkins. So it runs on a remote server, the Jenkins build that is, and it will message us if something is broken. Event management system is basically a Angular 10 project that is using Bootstrap 4, and it has a front end and a back end. So there's a lot of room for places where the build could break. So for this case, we have a Teams chat where Jenkins is messaging us whenever builds break or they've been deployed, which is super handy. I'll also bring up the remote server where we have the Jenkins iteration running. I just have to actually get it up. But we also have, hang on, just give me a second. We also have this working on a few other applications that we have at the moment, which I'm quite a fan of. Okay, cool. So we have our remote server up. I'll just see if I can bring it over onto the presentation screen somehow. All right, cool. So here's a bunch of projects running at the moment. We want EMS. Cool. So as you can see here, there is one branch at the moment, a developer branch. That's a branch I've been working on. And we have a summary when it loads. Let's give it a second. We have a summary of all of the builds that have ever loaded. So you can see here on the left, all of the build jobs. You can also see here each step. So you have whenever a build was pulled from GitHub, built, and then I'm testing the back end here, and then I'm testing the front end, and then I'm archiving the tests. And we can see if it's ever failed and a trend. But I'll go into Blue Ocean for this, because to answer Stefan's question from before, because this is a really good example of Jenkins being, Blue Ocean being super handy. So just want to loads. Cool. So you can see here we've got a bit more of a complicated setup. We've got the build starts, tests front end and back end at the same time, and then does the test and artifacts it. And then this last step, upload. So that's where it uploads the message to Teams. And the editor for this is quite simple too. It basically gets the JSON-like code of a Jenkins file and summarizes it in a way that's easy to understand. So you can just say, oh, I want to add a step, and this is testing for the back end. So yeah, you've got a few different steps. We can also look at the tests on this one. So it says, nice one, all 2 tests are passing. So we've got a front end test and a back end test, easy. So yeah, we'll go back to the presentation now. Just have to get the PowerPoint slide up. Cool. So has anyone else got any questions? In any case, if anyone doesn't have any questions, my email is available, and I also have a GitHub repo if you want to see what I'm up to. Of course, everyone here works in the same office, so you can also just message me on Teams. But yeah, thank you for sitting in my presentation today. This has been really exciting, and it's fun to get some presentation work done for the first time in a while. So I've really enjoyed this. But yeah, thank you.